November 1944. The skies over Nazi Germany. A B-17 bomber crew from the American 415th Night Fighter Squadron is on patrol, hunting for German aircraft in the darkness. Suddenly, the radar operator sees something on his screen. Multiple objects moving fast, approaching their position. The pilot banks, ready to engage what he assumes are enemy fighters. But then he sees them through the canopy and his blood runs cold. They're not airplanes. Red and orange glowing spheres, maybe 3 feet in diameter, flying in a formation alongside his bomber. They pace his aircraft perfectly. When he climbs, they climb. When he turns, they turn. When he tries to evade, they follow with impossible precision. They make no sound, they show no wings, no engine exhaust, no visible means of propulsion. He tries to shoot them down. His gunner opens fire. The tracers pass right through the objects or around them with no effect. The objects don't react, they just keep flying, matching every maneuver, glowing against the night sky like burning eyes. And then, after several minutes of this impossible pursuit, they simply accelerate away at speeds no aircraft in 1944 could match, disappearing into the darkness as mysteriously as they appeared. The crew returns to base, shaken. They file a report, and they learn something that makes the encounter even more disturbing. They're not the first. Dozens of other crews, American, British, and even German, have reported the same thing. Glowing spheres, intelligent behavior, impossible maneuvers, objects that seem to observe, to follow, to play with the most advanced aircraft humanity had created. The military gives these objects a name, borrowed from a comic strip popular at the time, Foo Fighters. And for the remainder of World War II and beyond, these mysterious objects will be seen by hundreds of credible witnesses, trained military observers, pilots with thousands of flight hours, radar operators whose job is to identify aerial threats. Most of these witnesses are now dead. The war ended nearly 80 years ago, but their reports remain, filed in military archives, recorded in mission logs, documented in official investigations, reports that have never been satisfactorily explained. Tonight, we're going to examine one of the most credible and mysterious UFO phenomena in history. Not crashed saucers or alien abductions, but multiple witness sightings by trained military personnel during wartime when the stakes for accurate identification couldn't have been higher. Objects that violated the laws of physics as understood in 1944, and that still challenge our understanding today. This is the story of the Foo Fighters, the unknown objects that haunted the skies of World War II, and the disturbing question if these weren't secret weapons and they weren't hallucinations and they weren't natural phenomena, what were they? The term Foo Fighter was coined in November 1944 by pilots of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron stationed in France. They borrowed the name from Smokey Stover, a comic strip that featured a character who often said, "Where there's foo, there's fire." But the sightings began earlier. As early as 1942, Allied pilots flying missions over Europe began reporting strange aerial phenomena. The reports were sporadic at first, easily dismissed as combat stress, misidentification, or optical illusions. But as the war progressed and the Allied bombing campaign intensified, the reports multiplied. Pilots described several distinct types of phenomena. Type 1, the glowing spheres. The most common reports involved orange, red, or white glowing spheres, typically described as 3 to 10 feet in diameter. They appeared suddenly, often at night, and would fly in formation with aircraft for several minutes before departing at high speed. They seemed to be intelligent. They dodged when fired upon, they matched aircraft maneuvers perfectly, and they appeared to be observing rather than attacking. Type 2, the dancing lights. Some pilots reported clusters of smaller lights that moved erratically, darting, weaving, performing aerial acrobatics that no aircraft could match. These lights seemed playful, almost curious, appearing near aircraft, and then zipping away when approached. Type 3, the silent followers. Other reports describe dark objects visible only as silhouettes against clouds or stars, pacing aircraft silently. These objects were larger, sometimes described as disc-shaped or cylindrical, and they maintained distance but seemed to track aircraft over long distances. Type 4, The fireballs. Distinct from the glowing spheres, these were intensely bright, sometimes painful to look at, moving at tremendous speeds and leaving trails of light or fire. They would sometimes approach aircraft head-on before veering away at the last second. Let me share some specific encounters drawn from declassified military reports and pilot testimony. Encounter 1. Lieutenant David McFalls, November 23, 1944. McFalls was piloting a night fighter over the Rhine when he and his radar operator both spotted what they described as 10 small reddish balls of fire tracking their aircraft. The objects were in a horizontal row, flying at approximately the same speed as the aircraft, about 200 miles/hour. McFalls attempted evasive maneuvers. The objects matched every turn. He tried to close with them to get a better look. They maintained distance. He attempted to shoot them down. His rounds had no visible effect. After about 2 minutes, the objects accelerated straight up and vanished. The encounter was witnessed by both crew members and was picked up on radar, proving these weren't just visual hallucinations. Encounter 2. Lieutenant Henry Giblin, December 22, 1944. Flying near Hagenau, Germany, Giblin's bomber was paced by 2 orange glowing spheres for several minutes. His entire crew witnessed the objects. Giblin reported that they seemed to be intelligently controlled and that they appeared to be playing with us. What's significant about this encounter is that it occurred during an intense combat mission. These weren't pilots with nothing else to focus on. They were in enemy airspace under threat of attack with every reason to correctly identify any aerial object. And still, they couldn't explain what they were seeing. Encounter 3. The 415th Night Fighter Squadron, multiple dates. This squadron, operating specialized night fighters equipped with radar, reported Foo Fighter encounters with such frequency that they became almost routine. The squadron's war diary contains dozens of entries describing the objects. What makes these reports particularly credible is their professional tone. These weren't hysterical accounts, but calm, factual descriptions from experienced combat pilots who had seen genuine enemy aircraft many times and knew the difference. One pilot, Lieutenant Donald Myers, reported that the objects seemed to respond to the aircraft's presence, appearing when aircraft entered certain areas, following for a time, then departing. He theorized they might be some form of reconnaissance or tracking device, though he couldn't explain how they operated or who controlled them. Encounter 4. British Royal Air Force, early 1945 RAF bomber crews returning from raids over Germany reported being followed by glowing objects that matched their described characteristics perfectly. Orange spheres, intelligent behavior, impossible speeds. The RAF conducted its own investigation codenamed Project Massey. The investigation concluded that the objects were real. They appeared on radar, were witnessed by multiple independent observers, and couldn't be explained as natural phenomena or enemy weapons, but the investigation offered no explanation for what they actually were. Now here's what makes all of this particularly fascinating. The Germans were seeing them too. After World War II ended, Allied intelligence officers interrogated German pilots and discovered something remarkable. The Luftwaffe had been reporting exactly the same phenomena. German pilots had their own name for the objects, Kraut fireballs, when reported by Allied pilots, but the Germans called them Kugelblitz, ball lightning, or simply Feuerbälle, fireballs. German ace pilot Franz Stigler, who survived the war, later described encountering glowing objects during night missions that behaved exactly like the Allied reports described. He initially assumed they were some new Allied weapon, perhaps a form of remote-controlled reconnaissance drone or a new type of proximity fuse for anti-aircraft weapons. But when these objects neither attacked nor interfered with his aircraft systems, just observed and departed, he became convinced they were something else, something neither side had created. This is crucial. Both the Allies and the Axis powers were seeing these objects. Each side initially assumed they were secret weapons developed by their enemy, but when the war ended and intelligence services compared notes, they realized that neither side had created them. let's consider what secret weapons actually existed in 1944-1945. German secret weapons: V-1 flying bombs, cruise missiles, V-2 ballistic missiles, Me-262 jet fighters, He-1Z8 jet aircraft, various experimental rockets and guided missiles, Allied secret weapons, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, radar-guided systems, early jet aircraft. The atomic bomb in development. None of these technologies matched the Foo Fighter descriptions. V-1s and V-2s were loud, obvious, and unmaneuverable. Jet aircraft had visible engines and exhaust. Guided missiles had visible control surfaces and followed predictable paths. The Foo Fighters were silent, glowing, highly maneuverable, and seemed to defy known propulsion methods. So if neither side created them, what were they? The military brass on both sides took these reports seriously, very seriously. They conducted investigations, interviewed witnesses, analyzed radar data, and tried to determine if these objects posed a threat. The American investigation was partly handled by the 415th Night Fighter Squadron's intelligence officer, who compiled detailed reports and sent them up the chain of command. These reports eventually reached the Pentagon, where they were classified and filed away. The classification wasn't because the military knew what the objects were and wanted to hide the truth. It was because they didn't know, and they didn't want to create public panic about mysterious objects flying through combat zones with impunity. From declassified documents, we can reconstruct the military's working theories at the time. Theory 1. German secret weapon. Initially, Allied intelligence assumed the Foo Fighters were some form of German technology, perhaps psychological warfare devices designed to unnerve pilots, or reconnaissance drones, or a new type of radar jamming system. But this theory had problems. Why would the Germans waste resources on devices that didn't actually damage Allied aircraft? Why were they seen over areas far from German territory? And most damning, why were German pilots reporting the same things? Theory 2. Natural phenomena. Some scientists suggested the objects were forms of ball lightning, St. Elmo's fire, or other atmospheric electrical phenomena. The glowing spheres could be explained as ionized plasma held together by electromagnetic fields. But this theory couldn't explain the intelligent behavior. Natural phenomena don't match aircraft maneuvers, don't maintain formation, don't respond to attempts to engage them. Ball lightning also doesn't typically appear on radar or pace aircraft for minutes at a time. Theory 3. Optical illusions. Perhaps the pilots were seeing reflections, ice crystals catching light, or the effects of oxygen deprivation at high altitude combined with the stress of combat. But this theory falls apart when you consider the radar returns. Optical illusions don't show up on radar. They also don't appear to multiple independent observers simultaneously, or persist for several minutes while the aircraft performs various maneuvers. Theory 4. Mass hallucination. Maybe the phenomenon was psychological, combat stress, expectation bias, or shared delusion among crews who'd heard stories about the mysterious lights. But trained pilots are specifically selected and trained to remain calm and accurate under stress. They're taught to identify aircraft, to estimate speeds and distances, to report clearly and factually. Mass hallucination also doesn't explain the radar contacts or the consistency of reports from pilots who'd never heard of Foo Fighters before their own encounters. None of the conventional explanations worked, which left the military with an uncomfortable conclusion. Something real was flying in combat zones alongside the most advanced aircraft humanity had created, something that demonstrated capabilities far beyond contemporary technology, and crucially, something that seemed more interested in observing than interfering. Not a single Foo Fighter encounter resulted in aircraft damage or casualties. They never attacked. They never jammed systems. They never led aircraft into danger. They just appeared, observed, and departed. This behavioral pattern is itself deeply strange. If they were enemy weapons, why not weaponize them? If they were natural phenomena, why the apparently intelligent tracking behavior? If they were hallucinations, why the consistent descriptions and radar confirmations? When you compile all the Foo Fighter reports from World War II, American, British, German, and other Allied forces, clear patterns emerge. These patterns tell us something important about what we're dealing with, even if they don't explain what it is. Pattern 1. Geographic distribution. Foo Fighters were most commonly reported over Germany and occupied Western Europe, particularly along the Rhine Valley. There were also significant numbers of reports from the Pacific Theater, where American pilots flying missions against Japan reported similar phenomena. Interestingly, reports were clustered around areas of heavy combat activity, major bombing routes, fighter patrol zones, and strategic targets. This suggests either that the phenomena were attracted to combat, or that pilots were simply more alert and more likely to notice unusual objects in high-threat environments. Pattern 2. Temporal distributions reports increased dramatically from mid-1944 through early 1945, the most intense period of the Allied bombing campaign in Europe. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, European sightings dropped to near zero. However, reports continued in the Pacific until Japan's surrender in August 1945. This temporal pattern initially suggested the objects might be related to the war itself, perhaps experimental weapons or some phenomenon triggered by the massive aerial combat operations. But it could also simply reflect reporting bias. After the war, there were fewer military flights and less incentive to file reports about unusual observations. Pattern 3. Behavioral characteristics. The most consistent behavioral features reported across hundreds of encounters were non-aggressive, never attacked, never damaged aircraft; responsive, seemed to react to pilot actions matching maneuvers; evasive, when fired upon, often dodged or accelerated away; curious, approached aircraft, maintained observation distance; brief, most encounters lasted 2 to 5 minutes before objects departed; silent, no engine noise, no sonic boom, despite high speeds. This behavioral profile doesn't match any weapon system. Weapons are designed to damage, destroy, or at least intimidate. The Foo Fighters did none of these things. They observed and departed. Pattern 4. Physical characteristics. The most consistent physical descriptions were size, 3 to 10 feet in diameter for spherical objects; color, orange, red, white, or occasionally greenish-blue glow; luminosity, bright enough to see clearly, but not blinding; shape, spherical most common, but also discs, cylinders, and irregular shapes; speed, could match aircraft 200 plus chevaux and Porsche and accelerate to much higher speeds; maneuverability, could perform turns, climbs, and accelerations impossible for 1944 aircraft. Pattern 5. Technical effects. Some reports included effects on aircraft systems, temporary radio interference, or static compass deviations. While objects were nearby, radar returns that were unusually strong or had unusual characteristics. Occasional reports of heat or tingling sensations. These effects were mild and temporary, not the kind of debilitating electronic warfare effects you'd expect from a weapon system, but consistent with something generating electromagnetic fields. Now let's examine some of the more unusual encounters that don't fit the standard pattern. The pulsing triangle. February 1945. A B-24 crew over Germany reported a large triangular object, dark against the stars, that pulsed with light at its 3 points. The object paced their bomber for nearly 10 minutes, maintaining perfect formation despite the pilot's attempts to evade. When the pilot finally radioed for assistance, the object accelerated straight up and vanished. The entire crew witnessed it, and it appeared on radar as a solid return. The formation flight. December 1944. A squadron of P-47 fighters encountered approximately 15 glowing spheres arranged in a precise geometric pattern, a three-dimensional formation that moved as a unit. When the squadron leader approached to investigate, the entire formation rotated in place, maintaining its geometry, then shot off toward the horizon at an estimated speed over 1,000 mph, far exceeding anything achievable by 1944 aircraft. The close approach, January 1945. A night fighter crew reported a glowing sphere that approached to within 10 feet of their aircraft, so close the pilot could see details. He described it as a perfectly smooth sphere that seemed to be made of luminous material, not just reflecting light, but generating it. There were no visible seams, rivets, or other construction details. After about 30 seconds at close range, the object dropped away beneath the aircraft and accelerated out of sight in seconds. These more detailed encounters give us additional information. The objects appeared to be solid, not just light phenomena. They could maintain precise positions and formations. They demonstrated awareness of their surroundings and other aircraft. Their acceleration capabilities far exceeded contemporary technology. They showed no visible means of propulsion, no rockets, no jets, no propellers. Here's what makes this genuinely mysterious. In 1944, there was no technology on Earth that could produce these effects. None. Remote-controlled aircraft existed, but were primitive, short-range, and required visible flight characteristics. Jet engines were brand new and produced obvious exhaust. Rockets were loud and left visible trails. Nothing could perform the silent, glowing, highly maneuverable flight that Foo Fighters demonstrated. And we need to address something important. These weren't isolated crackpots making wild claims. These were trained military observers, pilots with thousands of flight hours, radar operators whose job was identifying aircraft, crews who'd been in combat and knew the difference between an aircraft and something else. When a bomber crew of 10 men all report seeing the same thing, when it appears on radar, when it's photographed, yes, there were some photographs, though most were poor quality due to nighttime conditions. When similar reports come from independent sources across different theaters of war, you're dealing with something real. The question isn't whether the Foo Fighters existed. The question is, what were they? The military took the Foo Fighter reports seriously enough to conduct formal investigations. Let's examine what those investigations found. And, more importantly, what they didn't find. The American investigation. In late 1944, as Foo Fighter reports accumulated, American intelligence agencies began systematic investigation. The 415th Night Fighter Squadron's intelligence officer compiled a comprehensive report that was forwarded to higher command. The investigation included interviews with dozens of pilots and crew members, analysis of radar data, review of combat, camera footage, examination of aircraft for damage or unusual effects, consultation with scientists about possible natural phenomena, intelligence gathering about potential German secret weapons. The investigation's conclusions, as documented in declassified reports from 1945, the phenomena were real, they appeared on radar, and were witnessed by credible observers. They were not hallucinations, optical illusions, or combat stress. They did not match any known German weapons or aircraft. They did not match any known natural phenomena. They posed no apparent threat to aircraft or missions. Their origin and nature could not be determined. That final point is crucial. After a thorough investigation by military intelligence, the conclusion was essentially, we don't know. The British investigation. The Royal Air Force conducted its own investigation, codenamed Project Massey, though some sources refer to it as simply part of broader intelligence gathering. British investigators reached similar conclusions to their American counterparts. One particularly interesting aspect of the British investigation was their consultation with scientists from the Telecommunications Research Establishment, Britain's Center for Radar and Electronics Development. These scientists examined the hypothesis that Foo Fighters might be some form of advanced electronic warfare device. Their conclusion, the radar returns were too consistent with solid objects to be electronic spoofing, and the visual characteristics didn't match any known electronic warfare technique. If they were German devices, they represented technology far ahead of anything the British had developed or knew about. The German perspective. After the war, American and British intelligence interrogated German scientists, engineers, and military officers about advanced weapons programs. They specifically asked about the Foo Fighters. The Germans had no idea what they were. They'd seen them too, and they'd assumed they were Allied technology. One interrogated Luftwaffe officer stated, "We thought you had developed some new form of psychological warfare device. They appeared over our own territory, followed our fighters, but never attacked. We reported them up the chain of command, but no explanation was ever provided. German scientists involved in exotic weapons research, rocket programs, jet development, even the few who worked on nuclear research, unanimously stated they developed nothing that matched the Foo Fighter descriptions. This created a deeply uncomfortable situation. Both sides saw the objects, both sides investigated, and neither side created them." Project Sign and the post-war investigation. After World War II ended, the United States military continued to receive reports of similar phenomena: glowing objects following aircraft, performing impossible maneuvers, appearing on radar. This led to the creation of Project Sign in 1947, the first official U.S. Air Force investigation of what would later be called UFOs. Project Sign specifically examined wartime Foo Fighter reports as part of its data set. The project's initial classified report, completed in 1948, suggested that some of these objects might be of extraterrestrial origin. This conclusion was rejected by higher command. The report was suppressed, and Project Sign was replaced by Project Grudge, which took a more skeptical approach. But it's significant that military investigators examining the full set of Foo Fighter data considered the possibility that these objects weren't human-made. The scientific analysis. Let's examine what scientists proposed as explanations. Explanation 1. Ball lightning. Atmospheric physicist Dr. Lewis W. Bower suggested that some Foo Fighter reports might be ball lightning, a rare and poorly understood phenomenon where spheres of ionized plasma form during thunderstorms. Problems with this theory. Ball lightning is extremely rare and usually short-lived, seconds. It doesn't typically follow aircraft or respond to their maneuvers. It doesn't usually appear in clear weather. It doesn't explain the radar returns or the consistent behavioral patterns. Explanation 2. St. Elmo's fire. Another atmospheric phenomenon where ionized gas creates glowing effects on aircraft surfaces during certain conditions. Problems with this theory. St. Elmo's fire appears on the aircraft itself, not separate from it. It doesn't move independently or maintain distance from aircraft. It doesn't appear on radar as separate objects. Pilots are trained to recognize it and wouldn't mistake it for external objects. Explanation 3. Electrostatic discharge. Some scientists propose that friction between aircraft and certain atmospheric conditions could create electrical discharges that appeared as glowing objects. Problems. Doesn't explain the intelligent tracking behavior. Doesn't explain objects that maintain position for minutes. Doesn't explain radar returns. Doesn't explain sightings by multiple aircraft at different locations simultaneously. Explanation 4. Psychological factors. Perhaps the most common skeptical explanation: pilots were misidentifying ordinary things, planets, stars, other aircraft, due to stress, expectation, or suggestion. Problems. Doesn't explain radar confirmations, doesn't explain consistency across different theaters and nations, doesn't account for close-range observations with detailed descriptions, insults the competence of trained observers. Explanation 5. Secret German technology. Maybe the Nazis had developed something that remained classified even after their defeat. Problems. No evidence in captured German documents, no testimony from German scientists or engineers, doesn't explain sightings over Allied-controlled territory, doesn't explain why Germans reported them too, doesn't explain Pacific Theater sightings. None of the scientific explanations fully account for the Foo Fighter phenomenon. Each can explain some reports, but none explain all of them, particularly the most detailed, well-documented encounters with multiple witnesses and radar confirmation. This left investigators with three uncomfortable possibilities. Multiple different phenomena were being reported under the same name. There was a genuine unknown technology operating in wartime skies. Something truly anomalous was occurring that didn't fit into current scientific understanding. The official investigations never reached a final conclusion. Files were classified, reports were filed away, and as the Cold War intensified, attention shifted to new threats. But the mystery remained, and it would return. Today, nearly 80 years after the last World War II Foo Fighter reports, we can examine this phenomenon with the benefit of modern knowledge, declassified documents, and broader context. What can we say now that couldn't be said in 1945? What we know. Now, technology. Modern aerospace technology has given us capabilities that would seem magical in 1944. Drone aircraft with extended range and sophisticated control systems, plasma physics, and our understanding of ionized gases, advanced radar and electronic warfare techniques, LED technology and sophisticated lighting systems, understanding of atmospheric phenomena. Could Foo Fighters have been an early form of technology we now understand? Let's examine each possibility. Modern drones? No. Even our most advanced drones require visible control surfaces, make noise, and don't generate their own luminosity. The acceleration and maneuverability described in Foo Fighter reports still exceeds current drone capabilities, especially for the size objects described. Plasma phenomena, possibly some reports. We now know that certain atmospheric conditions can generate plasma phenomena that weren't understood in the 1940s. However, these phenomena are still rare, don't typically track objects, and don't explain the most detailed encounters. Electronic warfare. Modern electronic warfare can create false radar returns and interfere with systems, but it can't create visible glowing objects that multiple observers see with their eyes, and 1940s radar was too primitive to be fooled by techniques that work on modern systems. What we know now, documents. Declassification of wartime documents has revealed the extent of Allied and German secret weapons programs, the full range of what each side was developing. Intelligence reports showing neither side understood. The Foo Fighters continued sightings into the early Cold War period. Official investigations that took the phenomenon seriously. What we haven't found in declassified documents, any evidence of secret technology that matches Foo Fighter characteristics, any smoking gun explanation from either side, any indication the phenomenon was understood by contemporary investigators. What we know now, similar phenomena. The Foo Fighter reports weren't unique. Similar phenomena have been reported throughout aviation history. Pre-Edo-Ward, ghost flyers over Scandinavia in the 1930s, mystery aircraft over the U.S. Pacific coast in the 1940s. Post-World War, the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947 that sparked the modern UFO era, military pilot sightings throughout the Cold War. The 2004 USS Nimitz encounters with tic-tac objects. The characteristics reported are strikingly similar. Glowing objects, impossible maneuvers, intelligent behavior, electromagnetic effects. This suggests either a consistent misidentification, misunderstanding of natural phenomena across decades, a genuine unknown phenomenon that has been occurring throughout modern aviation history, modern analysis of original reports. Researchers who've examined the original Foo Fighter reports using modern analytical techniques note several significant factors. Quality of witnesses. These were trained observers in high-stress situations where accurate identification was literally life or death. Misidentification was professionally unacceptable and potentially fatal. This makes their testimony more credible than casual civilian UFO reports. Consistency. Across independent sources, reports from American, British, and German pilots who had no contact with each other showed remarkable consistency. This argues against mass hysteria or cultural expectation creating false reports. Radar confirmation. Multiple encounters included radar returns, eliminating purely visual phenomena. While 1940s radar was primitive, it could distinguish between solid objects and empty sky. Lack of hostility. The non-aggressive nature is itself evidence of something unusual. Natural phenomena aren't non-aggressive, they just are. The fact that Foo Fighters seem to deliberately avoid interfering with aircraft suggests intelligence or programming. Physical effects. The reported electromagnetic effects, radio interference, compass deviation, suggest the objects generated fields strong enough to affect aircraft systems, but not strong enough to be weaponized. This odd middle ground doesn't match either natural phenomena or weapon systems. Current theories. Modern researchers have proposed several theories. Theory 1, classified technology. Perhaps the US or Soviet Union developed advanced technology during or shortly after the war that remains classified. Maybe Foo Fighters were early tests that both sides kept secret. Problems. Doesn't explain German sightings, doesn't match any known technology development, and maintaining such a secret for 80 years seems implausible. Theory 2. Non-human intelligence. Some researchers argue the Foo Fighters were extraterrestrial or interdimensional craft observing human conflict. Problems. Lacks direct evidence, requires accepting premises, alien visitation, not established by other evidence, and doesn't explain why observations would be limited to wartime. Theory 3. Natural phenomena not yet understood. Perhaps there are atmospheric, electromagnetic, or quantum phenomena that we still don't fully understand that can create these effects. Problems. Modern physics and atmospheric science should have discovered such phenomena by now. The intelligent behavior remains unexplained. Theory 4. Multiple explanations. Perhaps Foo Fighter was a catch-all term for multiple different phenomena, some natural, some technological, some misidentified. This is probably the most scientifically sound approach. Acknowledge that different reports may have different explanations, while remaining open to the possibility that some reports remain genuinely unexplained. So what can we conclude about the Foo Fighters after examining decades of evidence, testimony, and analysis? Conclusion. 1. Something real occurred. The evidence is overwhelming that military pilots during World War II encountered phenomena they couldn't explain. These weren't mass hallucinations or hysteria. Multiple independent witnesses, radar confirmations, consistent descriptions, and serious official investigations all point to something real. Conclusion. 2. Conventional explanations are insufficient. None of the conventional explanations, ball lightning, St. Elmo's fire, optical illusion, secret weapons, fully account for the most credible, well-documented encounters. Each explanation might apply to some reports, but none explain all of them. Conclusion. 3. The phenomenon was real but rare. Despite thousands of combat missions flown during WW2, Foo Fighter encounters numbered in the dozens to low hundreds. They were unusual even during the war. This rarity suggests either a phenomenon that only occurred under specific, unusual conditions, something that was deliberately avoiding most aircraft, a misidentification of rare natural events that pilots correctly noted were anomalous. Conclusion. 4. We still don't know. After nearly 80 years, despite modern technology and declassified documents, we still can't definitively explain what the Foo Fighters were. This is itself significant. It suggests the phenomenon was genuinely outside our understanding at the time and remains at the edges of our understanding today. What the Foo Fighters tell us. Beyond the specific mystery, the Foo Fighter phenomenon reveals important truths. Truth 1. The limits of human knowledge. Even with trained observers, sophisticated equipment, and official investigation, some phenomena remain unexplained. This is humbling. We don't know everything. We can't explain everything, and that's okay. It's how science progresses. Truth. 2. The importance of credible witnesses. When trained military observers report something consistently across multiple independent encounters, we should take it seriously. Dismissing such reports as hallucination or incompetence is intellectually lazy. Truth. 3. Classification hides history. Much of what we know about Foo Fighters comes from declassified documents released decades after the war. How much more don't we know because documents remain classified? How many mysteries are buried in archives? Truth. 4. Context matters. These sightings occurred during the most intense aerial warfare in human history. Perhaps the massive electromagnetic activity, the stress on the environment, or simply the number of observers in the sky created conditions for rare phenomena to be witnessed. Truth. 5. Mystery endures. Despite our technological sophistication, despite our scientific knowledge, nature, or whatever created the Foo Fighters, still has surprises. The universe is stranger than we imagine. The legacy. The Foo Fighters hold a unique place in UFO history. They represent the most credible, best documented mass sighting of unexplained aerial phenomena. Military witnesses with no reason to fabricate wartime conditions requiring accurate identification. Official investigations taking reports seriously, consistency across enemy forces reporting the same things, physical evidence, radar returns, electromagnetic effects, no obvious hoax motive or opportunity. If you're skeptical of UFO reports generally, and healthy skepticism is appropriate, the Foo Fighters are the cases you can't easily dismiss. They happened. Something was seen. Something appeared on radar. Something made experienced combat pilots file official reports saying, "We saw something we cannot explain." As we look back at the Foo Fighters from our perspective 8 decades later, we should resist 2 temptations. Temptation 1, to assume they must have been something mundane that frightened pilots simply misidentified. This dismisses the competence and professionalism of trained observers who knew the difference between aircraft, atmospheric phenomena, and something genuinely unusual. Temptation 2, to assume they must have been alien spacecraft or something equally exotic. This jumps to conclusions unsupported by evidence. Unexplained doesn't automatically mean extraterrestrial. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. These were real phenomena that the science and technology of 1944 couldn't explain, and that even modern science hasn't definitively explained. They may have been unusual natural phenomena. They may have been something technological that remains classified. They may have been something we still don't understand. What we can say with confidence is that on dark nights over Germany, in the most intense conflict humanity had ever fought,